The video that I just uploaded, where it's me talking about storytelling and how one show's bad example, I said I'm gonna have to do a long form video. This is that long form video. So let's get right into it and recap what I said in the video. So I watched most of the first episode of this Netflix show called The 100. It is a very interesting premise where 97 kids, oh not 97, 100 kids are sent back down to Earth 97 years after a nuclear apocalypse, and the rest of them, everybody has just been in a space station orbiting Earth. Now, that's a pretty interesting story, right? I think so too. But it's like The Crimes of Grindelwald. It had a bad execution, but a good story. Now, why so? Well, first off, narration. If you don't know, narration is often used to cover up bad storytelling in movies and TV shows. But for some reason, in books, you can narrate and nobody cares. It's kind of hypocritical if you ask me. And so whenever I write stories, like one I'm currently working on, I incorporate the narration into the story. Now, like my recent story I've been working on, A Space Odyssey, that has the narration incorporated into the story. It's not just some disembodied voice. It's the main character retelling the story years later in an interview. Now, back to the 100. Now, that's not it. So, narration can be used in movies and TV shows very well. For example, the movie Avatar and Stand By Me. Those have narration done very well, where it's not just thrown in, it's actually incorporated into the story, where in Avatar, I haven't seen it, so this is just what I've heard, so correct me if I'm wrong, where Jake is having video logs of his time on Pandora. Then, Stand By Me, which I actually have seen, and this opinion is my own, it's where the character who is narrating is telling the story years later, as he's writing a book for it. Now, did the 100 do any of those? Well, considering the fact that in Stand By Me, we don't find that out till the end of the movie. I don't know. I don't know if it's just some disembodied voice, but it probably is. I'm gonna take a wild guess and say it probably is. And instead of showing us how the main character's father got arrested and killed, it's just like they're explaining it right before the whole action where they're getting sent down to Earth happens. Instead of actually showing us and giving us time in a writing structure, I can't remember what it's called, but imagine like a mountain, okay? So there's this little trail which builds up the characters. You get to know them and stuff, and then it starts going upwards and upwards and upwards until you get to the peak of the climax. And the steep is called the rising action. And then after climax, where it goes back down, is the falling action, and the flat area is the resolution. I do not have a piece of paper to demonstrate it for you, but that's the writing structure that it always should be like that. No matter the type of story, that's how the writing structure should be. Or else, like for example in DC's League of Superhero, keep getting the name mixed up. DC's Legends of Tomorrow. I tried watching the first episode, but it jumped right into the action, and I was just like, and so I never watched it. And now back to the 100 again. They jumped right in the action. Less than a minute in. Again, that's a horrible thing to do, because that's not how you're supposed to do it. Like, in my rough draft in my first idea for A Space Odyssey, I knew that I wasn't, I came up with, the action part of it first, but I knew that was not gonna be the final part of how it starts. Because obviously it should not. A part of me feels kind of hypocritical because there's another Netflix show called Lost in Space, which is kind of similar. Instead, it's a reboot of the 1960s TV show and movie. If I'm mistaken, it's from the 60s. And I've heard criticism about the original, and that from what I've seen, the reboot looks far better, is far better. If you haven't seen Lost in Space, it is an underrated show on Netflix. Go and watch it. Now, Lost in Space starts out kind of similar. And it doesn't really jump right into the action. It more so gives slight, quiet time to see the family playing cards. And then they start in the atmosphere. And they start. And you're kind of like on the edge because they're not telling you everything from the beginning. That's another thing. The 100 did that, so you knew everything you needed to know. And that's the thing. And another thing is with my story that I've been working on, A Space Odyssey, I am guilty of that. But I know that's not the final product. Because, again, that's a bad way to do storytelling. So, just because I have it where it's similar to the 100 in my story, doesn't mean I'm going to have that as the final product. No way. That's a horrible idea. Because then it's just like, okay, I already know what's going to happen. Why should I even continue? But because they don't really tell you anything in the beginning of Lost in Space, you're kind of wondering what's going on. You're like, And then they do these, like, flashback things that are similar to the show Arrow, where it's cut in, but at pretty good times. And they are to do with what's going on in the scene. Again, done really well. And there's also no narration. And, it is Lost in Space is a good example of storytelling, I would say. Looking at how they started it, I would say that's an example of starting storytelling in, like, the middle of the story, done well. I think it can be kind of hard to start in the middle of the story sometimes. And Lost in Space luckily does it well. And so that's really all I have to say about Lost in Space and the 100. And maybe I'll do an actual review of Lost in Space, because I really like it. It's underrated. But it's, like, the 100. I'll have to check Rotten Tomatoes, because, like, they said on Netflix, they said Netflix's Lost in Space on Rotten Tomatoes was decent. It was pretty good. And I'd say it was 7 out of 10, too. So I'll have to check Rotten Tomatoes or IMDb, and I will after this video, and I'll put in the description what it is for IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes for the 100 and Lost in Space. So thanks for watching my example of bad storytelling, and hope you have a good day. Don't do anything stupid. I don't know what to say. I've never really done outros like this in my long form videos. So all I have to say is bye. Hit the dislike button and hit the unsubscribe button.